In this video, we're going to be reviewing Red One and rescuing your holiday cheer with a cranberry and peppermint cocktail called the Winter Warzone. Today on the Martini Shot. Hello and welcome to the Martini Shot, the home of movie reviews and movie-themed cocktails. Before we get into the review, let's whip ourselves up a drink. So before we get into making the drink itself, there is a little bit of prep we're going to need to do, and that will come courtesy of one of my favorite new kitchen toys. This is a ISI cream whipper. It essentially allows you to make your own whipped creams, your own foams, and even allows you to do some flash infusions. And what we're going to be using this for today is to make a peppermint foam that is going to go on top of the cocktail. So if you happen to be able to get your hands on one of these, this is basically the process I went through to make this foam. It's being made with 1.5 ounces of peppermint schnapps, 2 egg whites, 1 ounce of fresh lemon juice, and then 3 ounces of water to give it a little bit of body. And then you are going to be using one of these little nitrogen canisters. You're going to screw that into here, and then you are going to give the whipper a bit of a shake. Once that's done, you can go ahead and unscrew that nitrogen canister and screw in another one. We're going to be double charging this, and same as last time, you're going to be shaking it for a little bit after you do that. And then you can throw this in the fridge to chill for a bit. I would suggest doing it around 30 minutes before you actually want to serve the cocktail. And if you don't have access to one of these things, which I'm guessing is probably most of you, I would maybe try making the foam in a separate shaker using the ingredients I listed, and just instead of doing this whole process, dry shake everything in a shaker. That means shaking it without ice, and hopefully that'll produce somewhat of a foam that you can pour on top of the cocktail. All right, but now onto the drink itself. Let's go ahead and start with 1/2 ounce of fresh lemon juice, 1 ounce of cranberry juice, 2 ounces of rye whiskey, and finally 3 dashes of Peychaud's bitters. Throw some ice in that shaker and shake to chill. Once you're done, you can go ahead and strain that into a small glass. And then once you're done, go ahead and top that up with peppermint foam. And there you go, now you have the Winter Warzone. I'm a big fan of this. I think the burn of the peppermint and the burn of the rye whiskey pair very, very well alongside each other. And that sweetness that comes from the cranberry juice really kind of helps to balance it out, making sure it's not too much of a burn. But there's also quite a bit of tartness to it that comes from the lemon juice that's in the cocktail itself, and a little bit of the lemon juice that's in the foam. And of course, with each sip, you're getting that aromatic element that comes from the peppermint foam. The foam itself is just such a fun component. I had a blast coming up with this kind of cocktail, and I can't wait to play around with that cream whipper a little bit more. But yeah, overall, this is pretty sweet, a little bit on the tart side, surprisingly light, has a little bit of a burn that comes from the rye whiskey, the peppermint schnapps, and even the anise notes of the Peychaud's bitters. Feels very reminiscent of a Christmas style cocktail, but is just different enough to feel like a whole new experience. Now that we have our drink, let's get right into the review. Christmas is right around the corner, and I am elated. I just love the season so much. The muted colors, the lighting so dark that you can barely see where you are, and the emphasis on government contracting. Does that not sound right? Well, that's what Red One seems to think Christmas is. Christmas movies can come in all shapes and sizes, from stop motion to Hallmark and even brutal displays of violence. There's seemingly millions of these kinds of movies because while they differ in approaches, their mission remains the same: show off the reason for the season and what it means for all who celebrate. Red One does not do that. It did not make me holly, it did not make me jolly, and it certainly did not fill me with Christmas cheer. Red One is a bland, apathetic, overblown Christmas action film that hardly ever feels like it has to do with Santa or elves or even the month of December. It takes a half-assed superhero approach that features charmless wit and retreads the genre's most obvious stories. On top of that, it looks atrocious with its undersaturated color palette and commercial lighting style. But above all else, it fails to capture the magic and spirit of Christmas, which in my eyes makes RED One DOA. When Santa Claus is kidnapped on the eve of Christmas, his most trusted elf, Callum Drift, must team up with an infamous hacker to track down the man in red to save the holiday and also remember the true meaning of the season. Ladies and gentlemen, we have ourselves another Dwayne Johnson vanity project here. I usually define a vanity project as something that Dwayne has put personal stock in that presents him in a very particular way. We saw it a few years ago in Black Adam, and we pretty much get the same thing here. Johnson tackles this role like he does many of his other most recent roles, with stoicism, self-seriousness, and baby oil. I'm not sure when Dwayne decided to discard all the charisma and charm that made him a star in the first place for these wooden badass types, but it's truly a disappointing turn in his career. The character of Callum Drift, which sounds like a name deemed too stupid for Fast and Furious, is the typical no-nonsense, straight-laced, all-business character that, for me, only really works if there's more of an irony to him. Johnson plays the role so serious to the point where there's no chance of finding any humor in his situations. Granted, the rest of the world the film inhabits is also super serious, so you don't even get the juxtaposition of having this character stomp around Bermuda or a shopping mall. It feels like a role scientifically designed to show how cool Johnson is without letting a shred of humanity or even fragility bleed through. His arc of believing in humanity again never really feels all that weighty, and by the time the film ends, you're just left thinking, that was it? Also, I'm not entirely sure what he's supposed to be. The department he works for is called ELF, but he doesn't have the ears or anything, though he can shrink to elf size. Also, he's apparently hundreds of years old. It kind of feels like he thought he would look too uncool with elf ears, so they left the whole thing ambiguous. Look, if Idris Elba could make it work, I'm sure you could have too. Paired alongside him is Chris Evans as Bostonian scumbag hacker for hire Jack O'Malley, who I'll admit is the more interesting one of the two. It really comes down to Evans' performance, as his story of going from low life to hero to save his son is pretty by the books and feels very reminiscent of the Santa Claus. Other than him, no one really seems to stand out. J.K. Simmons as a buff Santa Claus sounds cool, but he's barely in it and doesn't really leave much of a mark on the film. Nick Kroll has like one scene, and he's so goofy and over the top that I can't help but wonder if he was the only one who really realized what kind of movie he was in. But I do have to give credit to one performance here, and that's Christopher Heaveshew as Krampus. He actually has an interesting backstory as Santa's disgraced brother, who is brought to life by some truly stellar prosthetic work. I would have much more preferred a film about him and maybe his rocky relationship with his brother, but unfortunately he's stuck being the best part of a worse movie. I definitely want to give props to the makeup department here because the scenes involving Krampus also host a ton of other great creature designs, which makes me wonder what happened with the rest of the film because it often looks terrible. The design of the North Pole is so uninteresting and you barely ever get to see it because all of its scenes are shrouded in darkness, no doubt to hide its imperfections. Most of the film either takes place in the real world or under a blanket of darkness, and it really shows how poor and uninventive the art direction here feels. The effects are a mixed bag, at their best when creating the odd Christmas creature, but at its worst when trying to pass off a soundstage as anything but. My biggest issue with the film's visuals, however, comes down to the film's coloring. Christmas is a time of bright lights and rich colors, and this film is devoid of each. If you caught most of these scenes without knowing what the film was, I don't think you could guess this was supposed to be a Christmas movie. It doesn't look like one, and it doesn't sound like one either. I was kind of shocked how bad the writing was here, especially on a comedic level. Director Jake Kasdan has so many heavy hitters under his belt, from Walk Hard to even the more recent Jumanji movies, that I was shocked at how unfunny this was. And not even from an adult critiquing a kid's movie kind of way. Nobody in my theater laughed through most of this. The film doesn't really take great advantage of Johnson or Evans' skills, and the two come off void of chemistry because of it. From a story perspective, it takes a kind of cool idea and lessens it with generic plot points. Jack O'Malley's story with his child feels incredibly rushed, while Callum Drift's whole internal issue kind of just resolves itself by the end. There's even elements pulled from other films that are executed in a much less interesting way. Callum essentially has Ant-Man powers, but never uses them in as clever of a way, while the whole elf agent shtick was a lot more fun in the Santa Claus. There's just no real fun or identity to be found through most of this, lacking its own personality and deciding to be as safe and manufactured as possible. Look, I can see what people saw in this. A Christmas action film with two of the biggest actors in the world should be easy money, but this sure as shit is not what a $250 million movie should be. It's clear a good chunk of that movie went to the stars when it should have been invested more into the actual moving parts of the film. Red One almost feels like an anti-Christmas film at the end of the day, void of any real holiday spirit other than the fact that it happens to feature Santa. It doesn't really say a whole lot about the holiday or how we celebrate it, coming off as a heavily focus-tested, AI-generated piece of content only concerned with reeling you in with its stars and premise, but leaving you dissatisfied once you're actually seated. There's no emotion to it, it takes itself too seriously, it's visually bland, and even though it has like one good segment to it, it can't be saved from being a lump of coal in the stockings we call the cinemas. I think it's time for Dwayne Johnson to quit worrying about changing the hierarchy of whatever genre he's taken an interest in, and just worry about being in good films. For my rating, I'm giving this film 1.5 snow globes out of 5. Merry freaking Christmas. Guys, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Martini Shot. If you saw Red One, let me know what you thought about it down in the comments. And if you like what you saw here and would like to see more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow me across all social media channels. Those links are down in the description below. And if you enjoy movie reviews and movie-themed cocktails, be sure to check out my website, martinishot.blog. Until next time, thank you again for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Live deliciously, but please remember to drink responsibly.